Welcome to Chess, ladies and gentlemen. And I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. So as you guys do know, of course, we got the U.S. Chess Championship going on right now. And so I grabbed the round 6 game for you between Andrew Tang and Wesley. So it's kind of crazy to me. I'm looking at Andrew Tang's rating, and he's like 2,400 and something. And I'm like, man, I mean, he's doing pretty good during the tournament. And I mean, he's a GM. So, I mean, I kind of thought, he was a little bit higher than that. So that's crazy. Anyways, all of my people coming from the Philippines, I would say mabuhay to you. Magandang umaga. I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. Salamat, aking magkaibigan. I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. But if you're ready to go, let's take a look and see what we got for this game, homie. So, we have the move D4. Let me get my volume up, because I did forget to do it. Alright, so we got the move D4. So, one of the best moves you could play in the opening of a chess game. D4, E4. We got knight to F6. We got bishop to F4, D5, and we got knight to F3. And we have the London system. No, I'm playing. Eric Rosen is smiling from wherever he is in the world. We got the move C5. Of course, you guys know when you have, a center established in the middle of the board, your opponent is going to want to try to break that down some kind of way. So you guys seen a lot of my videos before, and if you play D4, C5 is very thematic. We do have the move E3, just reinforcing our center chain. We got knight to C6, knight B to D2, queen to B6. And for those of you that play E4 and play, a possible like French advance variation, you guys will, be familiar with these particular ideas. And you got the C5, knight C6, queen to B6, putting a lot of pressure on this D4 point. And then we do see pawn taking C5, and black kind of has a decision to make. I mean, am I going to take on B2, or am I just going to capture the pawn back? It is definitely much better to capture the pawn on B2, which is what we see in the game. That does allow rook to B1, and everything is pretty even, but you'll see that, white definitely gets a lot of activity for giving away that B pawn, and that's absolutely what you want. You don't want to just give the B pawn away for free. So we got queen going to C3, we got bishop to B5, we got the move E6, and stopping at this particular point right here, guys might be wondering, okay, is it possible to just capture this pawn on C5? If I got this queen right here, it actually is. I will say that it's a little bit mistimed right at this particular moment, and it actually does get better and better and better as time goes on. But you can definitely capture right here. You probably would see something like this. You get castles by white. You see a very similar type of situation, and then you would be seeing C4, and of course white. Taking advantage of the fact that black is a little bit underdeveloped at the moment, trying to bust open the position, and just get some active play going on. Like I said, you see black, and they have quite a few moves to get to kind of where white is. So you can definitely see that. But like I said, we do see bishop to B5 and E6. We got castles by white. We got bishop to E7 by black. Now, like I said before, as the moves went on and black got a little bit further and further into his development and king safety, it did become a little bit more possible to take that pawn. So I'm honestly not sure why Wesley So didn't take it. He might just be believing Andrew Tang like, hey, man, this might be a trap. I mean, sometimes players fall into that. They're high rated or something, or, they're a good player. So you're like, man, is this baiting me some kind of way? But we do see the move knight to D4. We got bishop to D7, knight 2 to B3. We got castles by black. Bishop goes to D3. And we do see queen up to B4. Now, of course, black in this particular situation, because like all these pieces are developed right around the king, you kind of saw this in the thumbnail. You really definitely don't want to get trapped, and as you can tell, black doesn't really have a whole lot of real estate for this queen. So you got to be just a little bit careful. We got the move A4, and like I said, you actually can capture this pawn. It is very capturable, so there's not really any like tactics or tricks behind it, but we actually see Wesley So going A6 in the game. If we did see queen takes A4, you would probably be looking at something like this. The knight would take, pawn would take, and I mean, black is just kind of up a pawn. Now, it says triple zeros, of course the computer says that, but I mean, it's an extra pawn. And between humans, I mean, a pawn sometimes can mean something. But like I said, we do see this position here. We see A6. We got bishop going up to C7. And like I said, you see that black, it doesn't have a whole lot of space for the queen over there. So you got to be kind of careful. Rook F to C8. We see the bishop coming down to B6. And we got bishop going back to E8. We got knight up to A5. And this is where it kind of starts to get a little critical. You're like, hey, man, this queen, like, look at the spots. You basically only have queen takes a4. You got knight up to b7. So, I mean, it's a tit for tat, you know, on the pawn situation. We got knight coming down to e5. We got knight down to d6. Now, you know, white is definitely wanting to put black in positions where, you know, the position is somewhat open. So, I mean, let's try to see if we can get the double bishops. I mean, it's not always like the end of, you know, the world if you give up the double bishops. But, you know, in general, with an open position, bishops can definitely become, you know, something in the endgame. So we do see Wesley So give up one of his bishops. Bishop takes d6, pawn takes d6. We got knight taking d3. But, I mean, you didn't get the bishop pair because then black just captured your bishop. So, I mean, everything's pretty dead even. We got pawn taking d3, queen taking d1, rook f taking d1. And then we do have the move a5. And this is like a subtle little move. It might kind of seem like, you know, why am I just moving a pawn like that? But, you know, you're thinking of the situation right now where, you know, now the bishop really doesn't have anywhere to go. It kind of has this square right here, but once this bishop moves, the knight coming here can be a little bit of a bother, getting rid of your last bishop. And generally, that's not something that you want to do. We do see knight to b5. Bishop does take b5. Rook takes b5. Now, as you can see, if you do go into that variation where the bishop is exchanged off, you would pretty much just be even with rooks. And everything would be everything. We do see the move a4 because, I mean, hey, you gotta pass pawn over here on the a file, bro. And what do pass pawns need? They need to be pushed. Exactly. We got bishop to a5. We got a3 because, you know, white now is kind of in a situation where they need to start paying attention to this pawn because it's getting kind of close on me. So we got the move h3, just creating some lift. We got the rook down to c2, most logical square, obviously, well, logical idea, you know, putting it on the 7th. We got the rook over to a1. We got the rook over to b2. And you got to be a little careful here. So we do see Wesley So go rook to c5. Now, you absolutely cannot take here because you would be put in a really bad pickle. Rook would be taking b2. Pawn would be taking b2. And kind of what are you doing? Because now your rook is overloaded. You have to watch, you know, this square. But you also have to defend this bishop. You can't do both of them at the same time. So be really careful when you're going into situations like that. So that is why we see Wesley So just sidestep. Just move over. And then we have the move a2. And we have actually reached a position where there is a really, really like super sound good move that Tang finds in this position. So if you want to go ahead and pause the video and try to guess that move, go ahead and do so. Okay, so it's not like it's the absolute only move. You can always say like, hey, man, you know, this rook is getting a little bit close. I don't want to have any checks. You know, king to h2 would not be a blunder. It just wouldn't, like, it would definitely give black some play, you know, give them the initiative. But the move that I'm looking for in this particular position is bishop to c3. And bishop to c3, it's multi-purposeful. It's good because, you know, whenever you are trying to think of moves when you're playing your chess games, you always want to think, okay, is there a move I can make that's going to like solve multiple things in my position? Now, the first thing you have to think about in this position is the fact that the rook is having to maintain the protection of this bishop at the moment. The other thing that you have to think about is the fact that this check could be coming rook to b1 with check. And then, I mean, what is your rook doing, right? So what better move than bishop down to c3 to just cover both of those? So now you have moved your bishop. So now your rook is free to move somewhere. And you have also made it to where if this rook does come down like this, you can just simply go king to h2. And, I mean, that's just a done. It's not a done deal. It's still a dead even game because rook takes and you got bishop taking. So you have done what you needed to do and you just move the rook back to c2 type situation. And you are good to go. So that is a really, really nice find in the position. It's just kind of like, you know, matching all different kinds of things together and just thinking like, you know, what is like the most impactful move that I can make? And as you can see, this does solve quite a bit of problems that white is facing, the check threats. And then as far as, you know, the rook being tied down, the rook only has b5 and c5 to hold this bishop. So we do see rook to c2. We got rook up to c7, you know, putting their own rook on the 7th. We got knight up to e8. So basically white is like, never mind. I didn't mean to do that. We got knight back down to f6. And then we see a little bit of, you know, repeating going on. But I mean, Wesley So is basically saying, man, you know what? I just don't want to draw. Also, too, you got to think that, I mean, Wesley So is about 300 points almost higher than Tang. So it really doesn't benefit him to draw rating-wise. So that's why we're not trying to just keep repeating moves. So the rook does go over to d8. We got bishop over to a5. A nice little Weissenszug situation. We got rook taking c6, bishop taking d8. So, you know, we do have an even trade going on. And then we have grabbed a pawn by black, but we are going to be giving our a pawn up. So the rook does take d6. We got bishop to a5, rook to a6, rook takes a2, and then we have the move h5. Now, there are a couple things that I'm going to say about getting into this particular endgame, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. We do see the rook up to a3. We got e5. We got bishop to b4, rook takes, and then bishop takes. And then we have the move f6. Now, if I back up to this position here, one of the things that you do need to be paying attention to if you are black is the fact that white at the moment has a dark square bishop. So you have a couple different options that you can try to employ, you know, going into this endgame if you are playing, you know, from the black side, where we are probably going to go into rook trades and we got a bishop versus a knight and kind of how all that dynamic plays as far as my pawn structure is concerned. Now, one of the ideas which, you know, Wesley So kind of starts at the beginning is, you know, thinking about, you know, putting his pawns on light squares because white has a dark bishop. So you can see something possibly taking the, you know, structure of this where you see all the pawns are on light squares. So if the bishop remains on the board, you know, it basically doesn't have any targets that it can threat, and you can basically be free to move, you know, your king around. The only thing about that is it is very safe pawn structure wise, but it does basically give a lot of dark squares around the structure for the bishop to kind of use and check the king and things like that. So it could be a little bit annoying. So getting a little bit further down, like I said, we see e5, so we don't see the maintaining of the pawns on the light squares. We do see this trade getting to this position right here. So basically what Wesley So ultimately decides that he wants to do with his particular structure is he is going to put his pawns on dark squares for the most part. And when you do think of this type of a situation, you know, you are thinking about trying to use these light squares to try to infiltrate and get into the center of the board, which is what you want in the end game. But the main thing that you have to make sure of when you are putting your pawns on the same color as the opponent's bishop is that you maintain the base of your chain. And that's something that goes, like, without saying, pretty much like through the entireness of chess. When you open the game, middle games, end games, it's all pretty much the same. You got a pawn chain, you got to protect the base of that one, homie. And that's where your opponent is going to try to attack the most. So we see and also h5 does have a little bit of a deeper meaning behind it, and I'll get to that in a minute. We do see the knight going to c7. We see the move h4. The king goes to f7. So you see the, you know, black king is starting to take advantage of those light squares. We got the move f3. So now you are seeing white. What white wants to do is put their pawns on the opposite color squares. So that way this bishop has free movement within its own structure. So you're really kind of seeing white do that. So we do see a knight to e6. This is a little maneuver, and we are protecting that g7 point. Pawn takes d5, knight goes to f4. We got g3. The knight goes over and captures the pawn on d5. We got bishop down to b2, knight down to e3. We got d4, and then we have knight up to f5. And you see that, like, black is operating with the idea that I was telling you before. As far as, you know, this is their pawn chain. This is the base of their pawn chain. So the king and the knight are both taking care of that base of the chain. And they are just trying to make sure that if either wants to move, the other one is going to be covering that point. Because, you know, sometimes, you know, this bishop can kind of get sneaky and sneak around here and try to chip away at this structure. So we don't want that. So we got pawn taking e5, knight taking g3. We got pawn taking f6, pawn taking f6. We got king up to g2, obviously attacking the knight. Maybe black just forgets that they have a knight and drops it. But Wesley So says, bro, I'm gangster. So, I mean, I'm not going to do that. So the knight goes up to f5. We see king over to h3. We got king down to e6, still maintaining this pawn. We got the bishop up to c3. Knight goes up to e7. We got king over to g3, and then we have a very well-timed knight to g6. Now, I'm going to get to what I was talking about before, that move h5. Not only were you thinking about, you know, getting a particular structure going on, but another thing that you're thinking about too is moving your pawn to h5 basically makes it to where most likely if white wants to push their h-pawn, it's going to be this type of a situation where now they have a pawn on a dark square. Now, they have this pawn on a light square, you know, opposite their bishop, but now they kind of have a little bit of an issue with this pawn. right here. So they were not able to get all of their pawn structure on light squares, which is what you ideally want. So, you know, it had like kind of like a little deep in-game situation right there. So we do see bishop to d4. We got the move h5. You know, so what black has done now is black has, you know, kind of switched back and forth, but they have adopted that light square idea as far as putting both of their squares on light squares, because now this bishop cannot influence the pawn chain at all. So now basically you just have to make sure that white's king cannot attack your stuff. So we do see bishop to e3. We got king to e5. Bishop goes up to d5. And you see how like all white can do is really just kind of move their bishop within the structure that you've created, and they can't attack anything. So we do see a knight back to f8. We got king down to f2. Knight goes to e6. Absolutely, you cannot trade on g5. You cannot allow that to be taken because that is a one endgame. So the bishop does sidestep that legitimately. The knight goes to f4, and to some people who might be playing white, they might be looking like, man, you know, this knight is really intimidating. It's really kind of in my kitchen. But the problem is you absolutely cannot trade your bishop for this knight because it is actually a losing endgame. So just to kind of show you guys what that looks like, if you did capture here, bishop would take f4. You see the the bar going way down. This basically allows, because of the position of the kings, it does allow black to infiltrate into the position, grab a pawn, and you're just winning. The king goes over to e2. King goes to g3. Probably would see king e3. King would be taking this pawn. The king would go to f4. And after the king comes down to h3, king takes f5. And then the king sidesteps to g3. And there is nothing that's stopping this h-pawn. So it seems very even when you do give the bishop up, but it ends up being not even at all. So in light of that situation, Andrew Tang understands that he cannot, absolutely not, under those circumstances, give this bishop up. So the bishop goes to d2 instead. And basically with black understanding that white cannot give this bishop up, it pretty much allows the knight to just jump and do whatever it wants to in this particular situation. The knight goes to d5. We see bishop to g5. We see bishop back to f4. Still with that same idea. We got king up to e3. Knight goes up to e6, threatening to trade again. We got bishop up to e7. King goes to d5. We see the king over to d3. Knight goes to f4 with check. Kind of like a spite check situation. King goes to e3. We got knight up to g6. Always trying to get that bishop, homie. Bishop goes back to g5. It's a pretty safe square to go to. The king goes down to c4. We got bishop to f6. We got king to d5. Bishop goes back to g5. King goes to e5. We see bishop back to d8, or first to d8. We see the move f5 or f4 with check. We got the king sidestepping over to d3. We have king to f5. Now, the one thing that is interesting about the situation right now is you have put your pawn on a dark square, so now this actually gives white a target, but it's not really something to write home about. I mean, you just basically keep your king in that vicinity, and you are going to be good to go. Black, you know, white is not going to be able to target your pawn. We see the king down to e2. We got knight to e5. Bishop goes to c7. The knight goes to c6. We see king to d3, knight goes down to b4 with check. The king goes over to c4. We got knight down to c2. We got king to d3, knight goes to e3. We got bishop to b6, knight goes up to d5. Bishop to c5, we got knight to f6. And then we start to see a repetition. We got the bishop going up, and then we do see, like I said, the second repetition, and then we have the third repetition, and we have reached the point where the game is drawn by threefold. So that is that game. Like I said, it was pretty interesting early on. I mean, it's not like it would have been the end of the world, but, you know, I really wonder why Wesley So did not pick that pawn off in the position, you know, a few times. I mean, you know, like I said, it doesn't lead to a one game, but I mean, it's like, why not have a pawn, bro? You never know, man. We're playing against humans, homie. But that is that game. I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by, and I'll see you guys next time.